Welcome to Ari's Quest Log. Today, I want to talk about a book review. But before I do that, I want to share a bit of context, because the timing of making this video is honestly kind of perfect. The book I am reviewing, Time Management for System Administrators. I read it as part of my reading roadmap learning in November 2025. And the last couple of weeks have been very busy for me. At the office we had a carpet replacements, which actually sounds simple, but in practice it meant that we had to move basically everything. Our workstations, our servers, our screens, our desks, even almost all had to be dismantled, our cabinets, all to a temporary location on which the floor was not to be replaced. And all that, of course, also had to be moved back. And that meant creating a plan, a real plan. Who moves what, when, in which order, what needs to stay online as long as possible, what can go down, what needs to be tested again afterwards. And next to that there was also a lot of physical work involved, emptying cabinets, looking through old stuff, deciding what to throw away, what to keep, what to store differently. And all of that happened while the normal work, it just continued. ISO 27001, the ISMS implementation didn't stop. Colleagues still had questions and issues, needed help. And things also still broke sometimes. So things still needed attention. So it was a combination of planning work, operational IT work, physical work, a lot of context switching. And I noticed at the end of those days, I was not only mentally ill, well, not ill, but tired, but also physically tired. And it is important for this video. As I said, in November 2025, I read Time Management for System Administrators. And this book, it is written, especially for system administrators and IT professionals, and not in a motivational or inspirational way, but in a very practical, realistic way. It is not pretending that you can just block out 4 hours of deep work every day and be done with it. It starts from the assumption that interruptions are part of the job. Now I do want to say one thing up front. This book is old. Some of the examples are outdated, some tools that I mentioned don't really exist anymore or are no longer relevant. And if you're looking for modern productivity apps or cloud era workflows, you won't really find it in this book. However, and this is important, the core ideas of this book are still relevant, maybe even more relevant now than when it was written. Because this book, it is not really about tools. It's about understanding the nature of system administration work. The fact that it is interrupt-driven, the fact that you are often responsible for systems that other people depend on, the fact that unplanned work is not an exception, it is default. And one of the things that this book does very well is explain why traditional time management advice often just doesn't work for system administrators. To-do list, strict schedules, productivity hacks, they tend to fail because they don't account for reality. And reality is you get interrupted a lot. What this book, Time Management for System Administrators, emphasizes instead is planning, documentation, creating buffers, and designing systems in such a way that you are not the single point of failure. Not just technically, but also mentally. Because you can't carry everything in your head. And in my head, a lot fit, but not everything. Also, you can't react to everything immediately without paying a price. Now, thinking about the content of this book while dealing with the office move made that very clear to me. If I hadn't planned properly, if I hadn't written things down, if I hadn't thought ahead, the whole thing would have been chaos. And even with planning, it is still intense. What this book also helped with is me seeing that feeling overwhelmed in situations like this doesn't mean you're doing a bad job. It often means you're doing a necessary job in a complex environment. And that was oddly reassuring. That said, the book does show its age in some places. Some examples feel very much from another era. And it doesn't really concern modern things like compliance frameworks or cloud complexity directly. You have to translate some of the ideas to today's context yourself. For me, that's not a problem. Because the mental models still hold up. The way it frames time as a shared resource, the way it explains why reactive work explodes if you don't manage it. Those ideas, they are timeless. For me, personally, reading this book 2 to 3 months ago helped me reinforce a few things I was already doing. Planning ahead, documenting decisions, creating structure, and accepting that not everything can be handled immediately. It also fits very well with the kind of work I'm doing now around ISMS and ISO 27001, where structure and repeatability are essential. So, who is this book for? I would say it's very good for system administrators, team managers, and anyone responsible for infrastructure in an organization. Especially if you often feel like your day is being eaten by interruptions. If you're looking for trendy productivity hacks or modern app recommendations, then this is probably not the book for you. This book. But if you want to understand why your work feels the way it does and how to design your work in a more sustainable way, then it's still very well much worth reading. And for me, actually, this was a reminder that old books can still offer very relevant lessons. especially when they're read at the right moments. Now, let's go for the rating for this book, Time Management for System Administrators by Thomas A. Limoncelli. And also on the front of the book, it's also written, stop working late and start working smart. The rating. Yes, it is an old book. For my use case, I would still rate this a 5 out of 5. In other words, for me, this is a must-read book. And I will definitely get back to this book in the coming years. Yeah. That was the review of Time Management for System Administrators. I thank you for watching. You can subscribe, you can give me a thumbs up, and I hope to see you next time on Ari's Quest Log.